Hey, it's TDA and welcome back to my Satisfactory 1.0 Masterclass. In each episode I set one specific goal that you can work towards and that you should be able to ideally complete in 1 or 2 settings. Now, last time around we set up a pretty decent looking mall over here. We have some syncing going on, we have gotten a lot of upgrades. So now the goal is going to be simple but very ambitious. We are going to complete phase 2. In order to do that, we are going to be all about steel, because honestly from this point on you're going to need about 1,000,000,000 steel beams and honestly not that many steel pipes, but well, a lot of steel in general. Now, in order to actually start producing that, of course, we're going to need to unlock basic steel production, completing tier 3 in the process. Now, interestingly enough, we don't actually need that much to get ourselves going, so we need enough materials for 3 constructors, 3 foundries, and 2 miners, along with plenty of materials to build things like foundations, belts, etc. In order to produce steel, we're going to need equal amounts of coal and iron, and I'm going to make my factory over here on top of this lake, but of course if you're on a different part of the map you might want to do that elsewhere. The reason I'm making it over here is because up here on the hills is some coal, and down here are nodes with iron, so combining these 2 resources and this open space over here makes for a pretty decent steel factory. As a side note, if you've been playing along so far, you might find that you already completed the 1000 smart plating. Now, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you are either putting the extra that you're producing in a storage unit or that you're putting them in a sink. Either way is fine. Just make sure that you're not just letting that production come to a standstill. It's way too valuable for that. These things are worth a lot of sync points if you use sync, and we're going to need a lot more later on as well. So one way or another, just make sure you keep producing them. Now, that lake where I want to build my factory is exactly in this direction, and you can see, well, if I want to drive vehicles across the ground, that's going to be at least very much annoying. So I'd rather just opt to make it simple and build a conveyor belt connection instead, because I do recommend that you actually connect your factories to each other by whatever means you prefer. Now, if you're in a different starting area, like the grassy fields and stuff like that, it's a lot easier to use vehicles because the terrain is a little bit less rocky, but I'm going to go for a more simple and I think more time effective method instead. I'm simply going to build a bridge to the other factory that is raised slightly above the ground. This makes it really easy to get around, to transport items between factories, although you do have to be a little bit conscious about how high the other elevation of the terrain is, because as you can see, for example, this rock sticking out over here, I've raised it high enough to make sure this is actually going to be above that rock. At the same time, I do want to stay a little bit below my factory, for the very simple reason this allows me to put all my belts and stuff like that under my factory, and now we have access to things like holes in the floor and stuff like that, where we can nicely connect everything to the top line production. I definitely want to make sure we're starting to make our factories look as clean as possible. Speaking of which, look at my asphalt. This is way better than the standard foundation blocks that we had before. I'm going to use the same principle for the steel factory itself as well. So I'm actually going to have the logistics on the ground floor, and then 2 blocks on top of that with a floor on top of that, and this is going to be the actual production floor. Now, you could actually get away with a little bit less than 2 of these 4-meter blocks in terms of space for the logistics floor, but I like having the space to walk around and not be too claustrophobic, so this is just a personal preference. And again, I recommend starting out small with just 3 of these foundries and 3 constructors along with that. Now, as you can see, even though it looks like I have a perfect 1-to-1 ratio between the constructors and the foundries, that's actually not really the case, because we're going to be making different things in these constructors and not all of these machines will be operating at full efficiency. So to make sure that all the resources actually go where they need to go, we need to pay very close attention to what is being produced where and what belts are connected to which inputs. So this is why I once again use that merger splitter combo. So I have the foundries going into a merger. This first one, strictly speaking, isn't necessary, but it looks good, so it's there anyway. And then the splitter makes sure that there's enough resources going into this constructor, but the remaining resources are then recombined with the next foundry, and basically this allows you to chain everything on and on. Now, currently we're limited to 120 items per minute on a belt, so that is why I am using pure nodes, because that's exactly what they produce. But if you look at the foundry recipe, you can see that these are actually consuming 45 per minute. So even though we have 3, that's actually going to require, if we would leave them all at full speed, 135 items per minute, which is not what we have on that belt. So that means that 2 of the foundries are going to be working at full speed, but we're going to set 1 to 67%, or 30 items per minute to be exact, so that we're actually not wasting any power. Then the very first constructor in the line is going to be making steel pipes. Now that actually only requires 30 steel ingots per minute, and this foundry right behind me is going to produce 45. So that means that the splitter is going to split off 15 of these ingots per minute so that we can use that somewhere else. Which is convenient because that second foundry is producing 45 ingots per minute as well, and combined with the 15 that are coming in from the first one, we have 60 per minute, which is exactly what we need to have the second constructor operating at full speed, making steel beams. Now that means that, strictly speaking, this belt isn't needed, but again, I'm just leaving it in because it looks nice and symmetric that way. But that last constructor over here is actually going to be producing steel beams as well, but only at 50% speed. Because remember, that last foundry is actually not producing at full speed either, so it's only producing 30 ingots per minute, so we can set this to half speed again, just to make sure that we're not wasting power. I'm going to use some nice floor holes to make my lifts look very nice and clean and connect everything that is in terms of output to the ground floor. Which then allows me to really neatly organize all my logistics under the floor. Now, I hope this shows you why I actually wanted this floor to be up high a little bit, because if you raise it down to the minimum height, you need about 1 4-meter block to move around. And this becomes really claustrophobic and hard to work around, and this just allows you to jump over stuff and things like that as well. I'm also going to connect the foundries, or I should say the inputs for the foundries, with floor holes, and as you can see, you can put those pretty close to the foundry for making connections, so I would say this is looking pretty awesome if you connect them up like this. And to organize the logistics of the inputs, what you do is first you raise down a lift to the ground floor to the normal height, then you place a splitter in front of that so you know where it needs to go. And you place another splitter on top of that, and then you can use those 2 things to nicely align everything else from that point forward. In order to organize the logistics in an efficient way downstairs, what you do is first you raise down a lift to the ground floor, like I've done over here, then you place a splitter in front of it so you know where that needs to go. And then you can use both of those 2 things to nicely align everything else. For foundries, the placement of the second stack of splitters is really easy because you actually just put them side to side with the ones you already have. And then of course the lifts go at alternating heights, so you have 1 belt basically for the coal and 1 for the iron. Now of course it's completely up to you whether or not you use ramps or lifts to build the actual supply lines to your factory from your miners. But I'm actually a huge fan of using ramps myself, for the very simple reason it makes it a lot easier to get around in your own factory. Now with these new buildables, look at this, it actually looks pretty nice as well, so there's no downside to it as far as I can tell, but of course if you want to use lifts, by all means do that. I actually built a secondary ramp here as well, 1 to the main level and 1 to the logistics level, again just to make my own life as easy as I can. Speaking of making things look nice and new buildables, you can now use the wall mounts to make your power run across the side of your bridge over here rather than on top. Now, honestly, I think both of them look fine, but yeah, just figure out what you like best and go with that. That said, I do think it's really hard to beat how clean an actual power facility with beams and ceiling mounts looks compared to just putting power poles all over the place. So the coal that we need is in this nice little oasis over here, and actually if you're here, take note of this purple node over here. It's the SAM ore that we're going to need for the next episode, but first things first, we're going to need to bring that coal to our steel facility. That means we're going to need to scale a lot of height, and of course you can make a massive ramp down as well, but honestly I would prefer to build a kind of around the terrain a little bit more, but that means we need to still scale all that vertical height, so you're going to be very happy that you are wearing a parachute, because well, unless you're a lot better at scaling the cliffs than I am, you're going to fall down a few times while you're doing this. Remember that lifts do have a maximum height, so you are going to need to switch lifts every 10 floors or so. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's probably going to take you a little while to set up a whole supply line like this, but in the meanwhile, remember, we're still getting FICSIT points and things like that, and this is also the reason why we're starting with a single belt of both ore and coal, mostly to get things going. I also recommend that you double check whether or not all your belts are actually working, especially the ones connected to these splitters in the logistics area, because, well, honestly, sometimes these lifts and splitters don't properly connect together the first time around, and then when you replace them, they suddenly do work. So yeah, just double check if everything's actually doing what you want it to. However, once that is up and running, we have, well, both pipes and steel in production, and we can make our little bus to the main factory. Back in the main base, I removed the elevator from the middle of our initial base and put it on its own platform, kind of out of the way. I also moved it down to the logistics level because, well, it's only going to receive outputs, so it might as well be on that level. Now, the next step isn't really necessary, but, well, it looks cool, so I'm going to change this into this. I mean, look at this. It's amazing how just a different type of foundation makes a massive difference for how cool your factory looks. Well, again, it's completely subjective, but I really like how this asphalt looks compared to the rest. Now, remember, you don't need to do any replacing of the actual foundations. You can just go to the customizer, select whichever one you have, and then just paint all over the ones you already have. And that's just about it. However, we have all these steel pipes and bars waiting for us, so let's put them to use. Now, in order to complete phase 2, we need versatile framework and we need automated wiring. And of course, we need more than just steel in order to make that. However, this is where the base that we built in the second episode, assuming you've been playing along so far, is going to massively pay off, because we actually have everything else we need already right here. And that means we only need to add a couple of buildings to this build in order to complete phase 2. First of all, we need some more modular frames. We currently have one assembler, but we're going to need 3 of those. Now, while I wouldn't recommend you trying to redesign your entire factory using floor holes, because, well, that just means you have to rebuild everything you've already done, you can, of course, just make sure that the new additions actually are making use of whatever you have available. So, for example, over here, the modular frames are being created in these assemblers, and I have floor holes making sure that the steel as well as the reinforced iron plates reach these assemblers. And for example, the reinforced iron plates come all the way from over there, to be exact. You can still see the floor hole, and that means that there's a belt going underneath here that you can't see, but it's there and will lead into these assemblers. Now, I intentionally made this logistics floor only 1 block high, mostly to show you how this actually works compared to the other one. So you can see there's a lot less space to move around, and in order to fit things into an assembler or any other machine that requires 2 or more inputs, we can't actually stack the different splitters and merges and things like that, so we have to alternate the direction of them. It still works. It's actually a lot more compact, of course, than the alternative, but in general, I think if you leave yourself a little bit more vertical space, it becomes a lot easier to work with, and you don't have to continuously fiddle around jumping over belts and stuff like that either. With the modular frames up and running, all we need to do is add 2 more assemblers to make versatile frameworks. Of course, there's nothing wrong with still using belts on the top floor, especially I like using belts when it comes to the plot to my mall. Because, for example, now I can actually see the versatile frames being produced. Well, if everything is underground, sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell what is actually being produced and what is not. For elevator items in particular, what I really like doing is actually fitting them into my mall. I don't actually need them in my mall because, well, we're not using them to build anything. But this way you can at least have everything nicely organized like I always need to do. And then we can feed them back underground and then feed them straight into the elevator. That means that if the elevator materials are completed, everything else will be stored in this box. And like before, if this box is full, it will automatically be synced. So at least we're never wasting any of that very valuable production. But on top of that, if we get to the next phase and we need even more of these materials, I'll already have a stockpile waiting for me. So that is 2 phase 2 items down, 1 to go. In order to make automated wiring, we're actually going to have to unlock advanced steel production in the tier 4. Now, we're currently producing all of this, so this should be fairly easy. Once you've unlocked that, all you need to do is set up 1 assembler making stators, and then 2 assemblers making automated wiring. Now, in order to make those stators and automated wiring, you're going to need to bring in that wire and cables from your already existing production. Right here, I'm just drawing them from the mall into the logistics area and then bringing them all the way where they need to go. And as you can see, you still have enough room to make sure your belts don't clip if you want them to. Because honestly, if you don't mind the belts clipping, then just make them straight. Saves a lot of work, and honestly, no one is going to see it because it's on the logistics floor. Not even you after you initially build them. And especially with belts that have items on them with a fairly low frequency, it even doesn't look all that bad even if they clip. I just imagine that there is some sort of intelligence behind these clipping belts that makes sure that, depending on what item is on there, it makes sure it goes into the correct direction. Of course, that's a little hard to believe when there's a lot of items on this belt, but still, yeah, you do you. Hook everything up, and it's just a matter of time before you complete phase 2. In the meanwhile, don't forget to siphon off some of the steel, pipes, stators, well, pretty much anything that you add to your production, you want to make sure you have that in your mold as well. I can also hear you typing in the comments, TDA, we're not producing nearly enough steel for all of this production. And well, you will be right, but if you look at your power now, you can see that the maximum power consumption in our base is currently pretty close to what our coal generators are producing. Now, of course, we actually have a little bit more because we still have the biomass burners connected as well, but really we do not want to use that because, well, then we have to start running around collecting leaves again. So, before we are going to expand any further, we're going to have to increase our power production again. However, we are actually already producing everything we need for phase 2, and in the meanwhile we can focus on upgrading our power in a way that we couldn't do before. First of all, we unlocked the Mark II miner, which means all our miners can now be upgraded to Mark II, which means we get double production out of every single node on the map. On top of that, we can also now unlock, with the steel and pipes that we have available, the Mark III belt, which allows us to actually transport 270 resources per minute. So we can actually also overclock our coal miners in our power station to the extent that we make full use of a Mark III belt. Now, if you already have the power available, all you need to do is copy this little steel build 2 more times, leave out the first constructor making pipes because you actually don't need that many pipes, just leave in the other 2 and have them produce at full speed, and connect that up to the already existing belts with steel, and you will blast through phase 2 really quick. Alternatively, you can do it the slow and steady way and join me in the next episode where we're going to massively scale up our production with all the new tools available to us. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.